Hello there, and welcome again to another study, another command in our study of the commands of Christ. This is command number 8, keep your word. But before we get into this command, let's revisit the question that was asked previously, which was from command number 7, do not lust. Since losing one eye or one hand will not conquer lust, why did Jesus give such a command? This command is not to be taken literally, but rather figuratively, because if Jesus had wanted to stop men from lusting, he would have instructed that both eyes be removed. Yet, even without eyes, men will lust in their hearts. So, it is through our eye gate that we receive the images and signals that direct our hands and feet. The right eye influences the entire body and is usually the dominant eye. Jesus emphasized the power and importance of the eye when he said the light of the body is the eye, Matthew 6:22. The greatest damage that comes as a result of lusting with our eyes is that we train them to focus on the delusions of immorality and become spiritually blind to the realities of life. This blindness allows us to rush headlong into sin, ignoring the consequences of our actions. And you can look at James 1:14 and 15. The term right hand is rich with symbolic meaning, and you can look at the previous study to see the huge list that I shared with you concerning the symbolic value of the right hand. It represents one's honor, authority, power, protection, security, and there is more. These important qualities are lost or damaged when we lust. Jesus used this analogy to communicate the important truth that the damage we do to others and ourselves when we lust is far greater than any limitations that would come with the loss of a right eye or right hand. So how excuse me. So how can we teach our eyes not to lust? If we fully dedicate our eyes, hands, and heart to the Lord, Romans 12:1 and 2, we will be able to die daily to the lust of the flesh. We can also make a covenant with both eyes, as Job did in Job 31 verses 1, training them to see others as Jesus saw them, in Hebrews 4:15 and 16. So hopefully you had some good ideas, good answers with your response to this question, and hopefully these answers also help you deepen your understanding of the previous command. And now for today's command, command number 8, keep your word. And it has a bit of context. The underlined portion here is the actual command, but going into it with some context, we have, and again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst make one hair white or black. But here's the main command, but let your communications be yea, yea, nay, nay. For whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil. Matthew 5:33 to 37. So it's about keeping your word, keeping your word. An Old Testament basis of this command is thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor, one of the 10 Commandments. Neither lie one to another, and ye shall not swear by my name falsely, neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Leviticus 19:11, second half, and to verse 12. Thou shalt fear the Lord thy God, and him shalt thou serve, and to him shalt thou cleave, and swear by his name. Deuteronomy 10:20. In this case, it shows to swear by the Lord's name. But later on, Jesus corrects the interpretation. When vowing a vow, when thou shalt vow a vow unto the Lord thy God, thou shalt not slack to pay it, for the Lord thy God will surely, it should say, require it of thee, and it would be a sin in thee. But if thou shalt forbear or abstain from the vow, it shall be no sin in thee. That which is gone out of thy lips thou shalt keep and perform, even as a freewill offering, according as thou hast vowed unto the Lord thy God, which thou hast promised with thy mouth. So if you make a vow, you had to keep it, but if you didn't make a vow to begin with, it was no problem. Numbers 30 verses 2, another one. If a man vow a vow unto the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his word, I think, his should with a bond, his word with a bond, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceedeth out of his mouth. I was missing a word there. New Testament application of this command is lie not one to another, seeing that ye have put off the old man with his deeds. Colossians 3:9. And of course, all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Revelation 21:8. So we are not to be dishonest, to tell lies, but to be truthful in our words. There may be some actual exceptions to lying, and we can see in Exodus the account of Pharaoh and the midwives who were to go in and see the Hebrew children that were being born, the midwives, and inspect if they were men, boys, and then report to the authorities, the Pharaoh's authorities, so that they can be killed. But this is what the midwives did instead. That they hid the fact that they were boys. And Pharaoh's confronting them, why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men, children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mightily. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. Exodus chapter 1, verses 18 and 21. So the midwives couldn't bring themselves to kill the baby children that were boys born to the Hebrews, or even reported to the authorities, to Pharaoh, because, it says they feared God, and so they told Pharaoh a story. They told Pharaoh that, well, these Hebrew women, they're so stout-hearted and they're so lively that before we even get a chance to show up on the scene, they've already given birth, and we don't know if it's a boy or a girl. That was probably a lie. But what does Pharaoh know about giving birth, in those days? What does Pharaoh know about that? Not so much, so it sounds reasonable probably to him, but to us, it sounds like a lie. But God honored the midwives in their, I have to say, deception, and he gave them families as a result. He multiplied their numbers and gave them families. Why would God bless liars? Well, in this case, I believe it's because they were honoring a higher law, a better law. Saving life, in this case, was more important than telling the truth. So there may be a possible exception in the case of saving life. And perhaps under duress, Deuteronomy 22:26. And this one's a bit of a disturbing passage, but it says, what it's really about is if a woman is taken advantage of, and she is engaged to another man, but she's taken advantage of by one man, that she's not guilty of the sin because it was against her will. Now that seems obvious to anyone today, living, and all of us today, that the innocent party in a forced sexual situation is not guilty. That seems obvious to us now, but maybe in those days it wasn't as obvious, and people were inclined to condemn both parties, even when one was not willing. So, in case that was the understanding, the law made it clear that the innocent party, although they were forced to do the wrong thing, was not also guilty and punishable by death. Only the guilty party. So, under some exceptions, under duress, maybe it could be applied in this situation, that under duress, that somebody may not be held to their word if they were forced to say it under distress. Even saving animals' lives, and I'm talking about exceptions to the law in this case, where we have the Pharisees, Jesus and the Pharisees talking about keeping the Sabbath. And the Pharisees were upset because Jesus and his disciples appeared to not keep the Sabbath by by healing the sick and the lame. And Jesus responds, "Thou hypocrite, doth not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox and his donkey from the stall and lead him away to water?" Luke 13:15. So he was saying that, aren't you allowed to bring your animal to get water, loose them from their stall, bring them to water? Isn't that work? And he was tying that as an equivalent to him loosing somebody who was under bondage of sickness or demon or something else, or leprosy. And he was saying that you're allowed to do what is good on the Sabbath. You can, quote unquote, break the Sabbath if you're doing good. And he goes with another example. Which of you shall have a donkey or an ox fallen into a pit, and will not straightway pull him out on the Sabbath day? So if your animal, your donkey or ox falls into a pit, you got to do, in those days, a lot of work to pull them out. You might even need the help of your neighbors. You don't have a crane, you don't have a bulldozer, you don't have a truck, you don't have anything like that to yank them out of that pit. But it seems foolish to say, well, they fell in on a Sabbath, so we'll come back tomorrow and help you out of the ditch tomorrow. No, that's not compassionate. That animal could be at further risk of injury or death if they have to wait another day until the Sabbath is over. So Jesus says, in the case of showing compassion, that you can do a lot of intense work if you're saving the life of a person or an animal, or even an animal, if it's your animal. And so sometimes some exceptions are made in the case of the law, because it's obvious that it's better to do good than to avoid doing good because it's the Sabbath. Swearing. Pharisees and scribes devised ways to lie, even when they were swearing an oath. Woe unto you, ye blind guides, which say, whosoever shall swear by the temple, it is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the temple, he is a debtor. Ye fools and blind, for whether is greater, the gold of the temple that sanctifieth the gold? And so whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing, but whosoever sweareth by the gift that is upon it, he is guilty. Ye fools and blind. For whether is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifieth the gift? Whosoever therefore shall swear by the altar, sweareth by it, and by all things thereon. And whosoever shall swear by the temple, sweareth by it, and by him that dwelleth therein. He shall swear by heaven, sweareth by the throne of God, and by him that sitteth thereon. Matthew 23:16-22. So these scribes and Pharisees were trying to swear by, try to deceive somebody by saying, well, I swear by the temple, but they would break their word because to them it was less important than the gold. But if they said, I swear by the gold in the temple, then they were serious with their word. But it was all ridiculousness. They were swearing to something that they thought was lesser in their minds so that they can break the words. But Jesus was saying that it was all just as important. The gold and the temple and the heaven and the throne and the altar and the gift upon the altar. You couldn't separate those as a way of getting out, of telling the truth and keeping your word. And maybe you might hear that sometimes today. People say, I swear on this, or I swear on that, on my mother, on my father. I swear by my whatever, children. And, well, that's not the way that Jesus wants us to live our lives. We have 3 different kinds of ways to keep your word here. We have vows, we have oaths, and covenants that we see in the Bible. Vows have to do or avoid doing. An oath is more of affirming a declaration or a statement. And covenants, there are several different kinds we'll get into here. The power of vows. There are 2 types of vows. What we will not do because they will diminish our love for God and our potential to be used by Him, and things that we will do in order to be more effective for God and useful for His kingdom. So some things in the first camp might be to avoid looking at materials or refusing substances that would damage the body, or materials that would damage the mind and the eyes, to keep ourselves pure. That's one way. A second might include a vow to read God's Word for 5 minutes every day, or purposing to witness to at least one person every week. Something like that. Something that we promised to do. Sometimes we get into something called foxhole vows. If we're in a point of danger or trouble or distress, we might make a flippant vow that, Lord, if you get me out of this situation, I vow to go to church every week. I vow to, give all of my possessions to the poor, or what have you. That's a foxhole vow, and maybe not a wise one. A vow is a powerful way to affirm before God and others that we intend to stand behind our word. The power of making personal vows begins with an awareness of how serious a matter it is to break a vow. And we see that many times in the Old Testament. Ecclesiastes 5:4 and 5. When thou vowest a vow unto God, defer not to pay it, for he hath no pleasure in fools. Pay that which thou hast vowed. Better it is that thou shouldest not vow, than that thou shouldest vow and not pay. So it's better not to make a vow if you're going to break it. But if you do make a vow, you need to make sure you keep it and do it. It's very serious in God's eyes. If we break a vow, the vow is still valid. We must confess our failure and then pay the vow if at all possible. And Psalms 116:14, I will pay my vows unto the Lord now in the presence of all his people. So if you happen to break what you made a vow to, well, you have to confess your failure and get back to it. Daniel, as an instance, vowed that he would not defile himself with the king's meat, nor with his wine. They recognized something different about his life and exclaimed, the spirit of the holy gods is in thee, Daniel 4:8. And that was after 10 days that Daniel made this vow. His countenance appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat of the portion of the king's meat. He didn't want to defile himself with the meat, but just ate the vegetables. Are there any rewards for vows? Well, God rewards those who make personal vows and keep them. That's the key. God honored Daniel by causing them to be 10 times better in wisdom and understanding than all the other counselors before the king. Vows like a contingency plan. It could be like a contingency plan, a plan to behave or act should a certain situation occur so that you are not overwhelmed by temptation in the heat of the moment. If you believe that you are prone to some kind of temptation or to stumble, it might be wise to make a vow that ahead of time that if I am faced in a certain situation, I'm not going to go here or there. Or, for example, if I have to stay in a hotel, I will not put on the TV if that's a problem for you. Or if I have to be alone with someone of the opposite sex, I will take another party with me as a witness. Something like that. A vow ahead of time in the event that you're faced with a temptation, so you have a plan of escape ahead of time, a contingency plan to prevent being overwhelmed by temptation. So this might be wisdom. There's a Nazirite vow we see in Scripture. Numbers chapter 6, 1-6. When either a man or woman shall separate themselves to vow a vow of a Nazirite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar or wine, or vinegar or strong drink, neither shall he drink any liquors of grapes, or eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of his separation there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled, in which he separateth himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. All the days that he separateth himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. So that was the basis of the Nazirite vow, and we see that in 1 Samuel 1:9, Hannah's made a vow because she was barren and wasn't having a child. So she decided to pray to God and make a vow that if God would give her a son, that he would perform the Nazirite vow for his entire life. He would give her, she would give him unto the Lord for that purpose. And that goes, so Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk. Now Eli the priest sat upon a seat by a post of the temple of the Lord, and she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. And she vowed a vow, and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but wilt give unto thine handmaid a man child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And Samuel then lived the life of a Nazirite vow. Another one is Samson, and that was when the angel of the Lord told the parents of Samson that he would have to live the Nazirite vow his whole life, but he was not able to keep that, and that's how he lost his position of power and lost his eyesight and had many failures. John the Baptist also lived a Nazirite vow for his whole life. And even in the life of Paul, he, for a brief period, he didn't live a whole life of the Nazirite vow, but in a short term he performed a Nazirite vow, and you could do that. Some were doing it their whole lives, but some did it for a time in a season. And Paul, after this, tarried there yet a good while, and then took leave of the brethren, and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Cenchrea, for he had a vow. So that was he shaved his head at that point because he had completed his vow, and I assume it was a Nazirite vow because that's what the specifications are when he completes his vow, is to shave his head and bring the hair. I think it's present the hair to the Lord. It's best always to make a scriptural vow. Actually, it's quite vital, and we see a very sad consequence of not making a scriptural vow. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord and said, if thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth out of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Judges 11:29-40. Now this was a terrible vow. It was an unscriptural vow because in the law God had already said that it's not right for his people to offer other people as a burnt offering, like the pagans are doing. The children of Molech, for instance, would offer burnt sacrifices of people to their pagan gods. Thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech. That's Leviticus 18:21. So obviously Jephthah didn't know this law or didn't concern himself with it, so he made a bad vow. And of course, if you know the story, he was victorious in his battle, and he came home, and who would you think came through the door first? Of course, it's his own daughter. So he foolishly then kept that vow and sacrificed his daughter on the altar as a fire offering, and that was not something God was in favor of. And he in fact said not to do it. There are other things that are associated with pagan rituals and paganism. Perhaps examples of tattoos. Leviticus 19:28. You shall not make any cuttings in your flesh for the dead, nor print any marks upon you. I am the Lord. Making any kind of associations with the pagan nations around us, with tattoos, markings that are consistent with the pagans. We are not to be a part of that. Interesting, there are some annulment of vows. In Numbers 30, verses 2 to 16, a father can annul a child's vow if they are in their youth and living in the father's house. If the father hears it, he can overrule it. But if he says nothing when he hears it, it shall stand. Sometimes maybe children might say something foolish, and it's wise if when the parents hear that they annul their words. They might say something, when I grow up, I'm gonna just live on the streets or something. Maybe it might be something foolish or something more earnest. And if it's something that's not scriptural, not good for them, a parent should say, no, son or daughter, that will not happen. The Lord, uh, the Lord doesn't honor that. Or if they say something else. So it's important not to let some of the foolish things that children say to let them stand, because they may be making a kind of vow with themselves that they might inevitably follow later in life. You ever notice at a wedding ceremony, there's the line that the minister usually asks at the end: if anyone sees any reason why these two shall not be wed, let him speak now or forever hold his peace. That might just seem like a kind of tradition, but the purpose of that really is for the father of the bride, his last opportunity to overrule the vows that his daughter has made. It's not for just anybody in the congregation to say no, no, but it's actually supposed to be an honorable place for the father of the bride to annul his daughter's vows if he saw fit. And hopefully it doesn't come to that, and hopefully all of that has been sorted out so that it wouldn't happen in that case. I don't know what would actually happen if it did, but that was the purpose of it, and that's the idea, that the father of the bride has the final word. We see in Job, Job rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of the children. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. In Job 1, verses 5. This is interesting to me because Job didn't hear them say anything. In this case, they didn't say anything that he could annul, but he thought, maybe they didn't say it out loud. Possibly they didn't even say it at all. Maybe they just thought about it in their hearts. And so as a preemptive move, every morning he would offer a burnt offering for all the number of his children, just in case they said something that was contrary to God's plan. And that's really righteous. That's really something. A great testimony about Job. Numbers 30 verses 2 to 16, we see that a husband can annul a wife's vow if he hears it and objects to it. But if he says nothing, it shall stand. Now, there may be some debate and how relevant this might still be, or how applicable. But I think there's some validity still to that. That if sometimes maybe a wife might say something half-hearted or foolish, it's important if the husband hears it that he is assertive and listens to the Lord and annuls something that a wife might say in the heat of a moment that doesn't align with Scripture. So, to all the husbands, if you hear something that your wife says that you don't agree with, it might be best to say, no, I don't agree with that. The Lord has a different view of this, or and not to be silent and let something stand that could potentially be damaging later in life. And, well, if this is not any more valid, the parallel is actually how God will annul Israel's ungodly agreements with the nations. Because just like a parent can annul the child's vow, a husband can annul a wife's vows, God, as our Father, will annul the ungodly agreements that Israel makes with other nations, and I think he can annul the bad agreements that we have made with the enemy, and if people have gone down a dark road and made vows to the enemy God can annul that because He is our Father. When He is our Father, He can do that. A portrait of Christ who can annul our godly vows. And that's Isaiah 28:18. And your covenant with death shall be disannulled, and your agreement with hell shall not stand. So that's the power of Christ in our lives, that even if those of us who lived an ungodly life and traveled even if to the full depth of darkness and made promises and vows to the enemy, Christ can and will annul any vow and the consequences of that if we ask Him to and when we come to Him in humble faith. The third one of the kinds of agreements are covenants. And in Scripture we have a few different types of covenants. We have a hand covenant in Ezra 10:19 and Ezekiel 17:18. It's much like a handshake of today. Two parties would shake hands or strike the palms of their hands together as an agreement. And these are in from lowest to more serious types of covenants. So the hand is the lower type of agreement, and the blood covenant is the most serious one. The second one being the salt covenant in Numbers 18:19. In those days, because salt was vital, each traveler in biblical times would carry salt in a pouch because it prevents dehydration and allows the body to retain moisture. And once terms of an agreement, a covenant, had been agreed upon, each party would take a pinch of salt from the other person's pouch and put it into their own pouch and then shake the pouch. This signified that the covenant could only be broken if the exact grains of salt were returned to the original owner. So just as difficult and near impossible as it was to retrieve your own salt grains back from your neighbor, in the same way, you couldn't break that agreement. In number 3, a shoe covenant, Ruth chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. The two parties would exchange sandals, signifying that the covenant was in effect until the sandal was returned. Boaz made this type of covenant with the kinsman redeemer to redeem Ruth. So you're trading a shoe. Hopefully they had similar sized feet. And the most serious one, the blood covenant. Genesis 15:7-21. After the terms were settled, an animal was divided in half through its median plane and laid out on the ground. Both parties would grasp hands, recite the terms, and walk together between the pieces of the carcass. This was the most severe and serious of the covenants. It signified that the party that broke the covenant would have the same thing done to them as to the animal. It carried actually the death penalty. The animal's death also represented the permanency of the terms of the covenant. The two parties could alter the terms while they were alive, but once dead, they could not change them. The animal represented the death of both parties, meaning the covenant was unchangeable. And this is what kind of covenant God made with Abraham. But when you read through the account, you notice that God put Abraham into a sleep. He did not allow Abraham to walk through in that same way to perform this covenant. But what God did is He walked through it Himself, and what He was saying is that He's going to keep both halves of the agreement. He wasn't going to allow Abraham to walk through and then the moment he breaks the covenant, have to be torn to shreds. But He, God, walked through the parts of the animal, signifying that He's going to keep both ends, both Abraham's end of the agreement and his end of the agreement. And we see that in the death of Jesus, He paid the price for Abraham and all of his descendants' disobedience, all the way back even unto Adam, all the sin. God kept both parts, and He was torn apart by dying on the cross as paying for the penalty of that broken covenant. Not God didn't break it, but man, Abraham and his descendants broke their end of the agreement. So a powerful covenant. And by the way, a marriage covenant is supposed to be like the blood covenant. We have 8 kinds of covenants we see in the Bible from creation on to the end of time. And they all point toward Christ. In the Edenic covenant, we have God saying in Genesis 1:28, "Be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." Now I show all these because sometimes some people might say the old covenants are gone and there's only a new covenant remaining, but I'm not convinced that's the case. I think all of the previous covenants have at least some carryover. And by that I mean this first Edenic covenant is still applicable in that we are to be fruitful and multiply. We're still to have dominion over the fish and the fowl of the earth, and we are still to be obedient. After the fall, the Adamic covenant, Genesis 3, 14 to 19, "Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above all beasts of the fields. Upon thy belly thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life." He's talking to the serpent. "I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." And of course, there was the introduction of pain in childbirth, and to Adam, by the sweat of his brow, he will enjoy bread and food. So that, I think, is still relevant. We still have to work. Thorns and thistles still grow. And so that part of the Adamic covenant still is in effect. As long as we have weeds growing, thorns and thistles, as long as we have to work by the sweat of our brow, as long as women have pain in childbirth, that seems to still be in effect. The Noahide covenant in Genesis 8:20, we have Noah building an altar, and he made a burnt offering. And verse 22, "While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold, heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease." So that's still in effect, for instance. We still have day and night, we still have seasons, seed time and harvest. Again, he's told, "Be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and every fowl of the air." So animals still fear mankind. Here he says, "Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as a green herb have I given you all things." So he was allowed at that point to eat everything that moves upon the ground. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat. But he had at least one restriction here. "But the flesh thereof, which is the blood thereof, ye shall not eat." He wasn't allowed to eat blood. "And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man, and at the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man." And again, "Be fruitful and multiply, bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein." So that was the first introduction of capital punishment. If you or someone were to slay another person, they would then be required to give up their lives. They were to be put to death. So that was the introduction of capital punishment back in Noahide. And God established a rainbow as a sign of a covenant to never destroy the earth with a flood. If we still see a rainbow in the sky after a rain or a storm, we still know that covenant is in effect, because God still promises to never destroy the world with a flood. So this is what I mean when I say some of the aspects of the covenant are in place for all time. We still have seed time and harvest. So let that remind you when you see a rainbow in the air, in the sky, that's still God's promise that he won't, still God's covenant, I even should say, that he won't destroy the world with a flood. Number 4, Abraham's covenant. I will make thee a great nation. I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless thee that bless thee, and curse him that curse thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. I still think that's still relevant. God is making his family a great nation, and has, and blessing the people of Israel will cause God to bless you as well, and cursing them causes God to curse them. I believe that's still in effect. So when somebody says old covenants are gone, I have to bring up some of these points here. Number 5, Moses' covenant. And that's probably the one people are talking about when they say an old covenant. They're thinking about Moses and the laws. Exodus 34:10. Behold, I make a covenant before all thy people. I will do marvels such as not have been done in all the earth, nor any nation in all the people which thou art shall see the work of the Lord. For it is a awesome or terrible thing that I will do with thee. So that entails all the promises and the laws that God gave to Moses. Next, the Davidic covenant. This is where God chose Jerusalem as his headquarters, his capital city. Jerusalem would now be the place where all sacrifices were done. Until this point, you could perform sacrifices at other designated points. You see that where Noah makes a sacrifice after the flood, Abraham makes a sacrifice in a few different places, and Isaac and Jacob different places. It got a little bit more strict with Moses, and it had to be with it had to have a temple and an altar and all that. But now all sacrifices had to be done now in Jerusalem under the Davidic covenant, and so that was still the case from that point on. And verse 12 of 2 Samuel 7. And when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house after my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. So after David, his family line would carry the eternal kingship, and that was ultimately Jesus was of the line of David here. And so that's what it's pointing to. That first of all, David's son Solomon would build this temple, and from their family, they would never lack a king. So that's part of the Davidic covenant. That will never go away. That says, his kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. Forever. Never changed, never taken away. Now we have a renewed covenant. Jeremiah 31:31. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was a husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. They shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and remember their sin no more. Thus saith the Lord, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and of the stars for a light by night, which divideth the sea, and the waves thereof roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart before me, saith the Lord, then the seed of Israel shall also cease from being a nation before me forever. You notice that God compared the light of the sun, the stars, the moon, and the sea. If those things go away and become no more, then the seed of Israel shall also cease. But as long as those things are still there, the sun by light by day, the moon, the stars, if that doesn't go away, God's promise in this renewed covenant is still in place, that he will write his laws, the same laws as we had before, but now written in their hearts, and they shall all know him. He will be their God, and they will be his people. And finally, we have a peace covenant. Ezekiel 34:25, and I will make with them a covenant of peace, and will cause the evil beasts to cease out of the land, and they shall dwell safely in the wilderness, and shall sleep in the woods. And I will make them and the places round about my hill a blessing, and I will cause a shower to come down in his season. There shall be showers of blessing. A good song there. Isaiah 54:10, for the mountains shall depart and the hills be removed, but my kindness shall not depart from thee, neither shall my covenant of peace be removed, saith the Lord that hath mercy on thee. And the terms are in Isaiah 11:1-6. The wolf will lie down with the lamb, and the little child shall lead them, and the cow and the bear shall feed. Their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The infant child shall play in the hole of the cobra, or asp, and the toddler shall put his hand on the viper's den. And the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So obviously, that one hasn't come to play yet, because the wolf doesn't lie down with the lamb. The wolf eats the lamb. The lion doesn't eat straw. And you certainly can't put a child's hand into a cobra's hole or a viper's den. But somebody did actually receive this covenant so far. Interestingly enough, is only one person, is Phinehas. In Numbers chapter 25:11, Phinehas the son of Eleazar, the son of the priest Aaron the priest, hath turned my wrath away from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake among them, that I consumed not the children of Israel in my jealousy. Wherefore say, behold, I give unto him my covenant of peace, and he shall have it, and his seed after him, in the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God, and made an atonement for the children of Israel. Phinehas received this covenant of peace, and an everlasting priesthood for his seed after him, ahead of time. That was Numbers chapter 24:11. And do you remember that story, what Phinehas did? Well, there was some gross immorality going on. The children of Israel were the Bible says they were in whoredom with the other nations, and Moses was trying to put a stop to it. And there was at least one couple that was so blatant in their deeds that they were going to go have intercourse in a holy place, and Phinehas got zealous for God's holiness, took a spear, and he thrust the spear between the two of them, through the belly of both of them. No doubt they were engaged in the act. And so he thrust the spear through them, and God, as a result of him doing this very thing, killing them both, God rewarded him with the covenant of peace, because he was zealous for his sake. And, well, by Phinehas doing this, he might have saved a lot of lives of the children of Israel, because otherwise God would have had to step in and start striking down people. But Phinehas did this and stayed off some of God's wrath. Interesting account, anyway. Keeping our word, it's about doing what we say we are going to do when we say we are going to do it. Jesus gave a parable of two sons in Matthew 21:28-30. A certain man had two sons, and he came to the first and said, Son, go work today in my vineyard. He answered and said, I will not. But afterward he repented and went. And when he came to the second and said likewise, he answered and said, I go, sir. And he went not. Whether of them twain did the will of his father? They say unto him, the first did. So, in this case, the first son said, no, I'm not going to go, but he repented and he went. The second son said, I will go, but he didn't go. So, Jesus is saying it's better, it's more important to do the right thing than to say that we're going to do the right thing. But there's also the two other examples that Jesus didn't give, which is a person who says they will go and do something and then does it. That's probably that's the best, but it's not in the example here, because that's obvious. It's best to say what we're going to do and then do it. And then the worst example would be to say that we're not going to do it and then not do it in the parable like this. Those two on either end of the extremes are not given as the example in the parable here, but I guess that goes without saying. So the best option is the unwritten one, is to say yes to the will of the Father and to do it. But barring that, it's also better to do the right thing, even if you said you weren't going to do it. But the worst is to say you will and then don't. Avoiding exaggerations. Exaggerations and half-truths should be avoided. Giving false impressions is often motivated by fear of rejection. This is a kind of guile or deceit. Psalms 32:2. Blessed is the man unto whom the Lord imputeth not iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no guile. Notice what Jesus said about Nathanael in John 1:47-48, where Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and saith unto him, Behold an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no guile, no deceit, maybe not even any exaggerations of the truth. And Nathanael said unto him, Whence thou knowest me? Jesus answered and said unto him, Before that Philip called thee, when thou wast under the fig tree, I saw thee. So Jesus pointed out a person who had no guile, singled him out, I guess, in this case, and let everyone know that was an important quality. So let's avoid exaggerations in our storytelling, in our relaying of information. Promises. Be careful of all your promises, even half-hearted ones. Sometimes we might say, we should go here or there. You promise that to a spouse or to a child or to a friend. I should someday take you to this, in your mind, it might be half-hearted, but in the minds of somebody else, it might be taken more seriously. So be careful not to make casual, half-hearted promises. Keeping our word is a powerful witness, even when it costs us. That's Ephesians 4:25. Wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Children often believe everything adults tell them, so that's why we should be careful not to make half-hearted promises to them. A parent might say, someday we should take you to the zoo. We might take you to Disneyland, something like that. Just be careful of that kind of dreamy, half-hearted promise, because this can cause bitterness in a child, because they would feel that you've made a promise and didn't keep it, so you broke it, and they're less likely to value the things you say later on. Teens who become angry or bitter can often be traced to broken promises. So keep that in mind to all the parents. And this was an important thing that my own parents emphasized. They never wanted to promise me things that they knew that they couldn't fulfill. They had seen in the lives of other people how children were affected when parents told them maybe genuine promises, half-hearted ones, or ideal ones, and they saw the disappointment in the children when the word wasn't followed through. So they were very diligent to always make sure that they kept their word to me as a child. Being punctual. Now this might hit a little bit closer to home for some of us. If you say meet at 5 p.m., be there at 5 p.m. If you cannot, don't say 5 p.m. And it becomes so common today and so excusable perhaps to say, well, I'm a few minutes late. You're always a few minutes late, and it's a problem I can struggle with. I've been late many times over the course of my life, sometimes consistently late, and it's something I have to struggle with. I have to always be on top of, so that I don't ruin my word. And what happens is other people begin to talk about you because of your lateness. Others think that their time is meaningless to you because you're always late. If you're always late, people become bitter because they think you don't value their time. If they had to be there on time and have to wait for you, it just builds and breeds resentment. I as I was alluding, I had problems with lateness. Sometimes it caused problems at work, personal frustrations, always having to excuse why I'm behind my time. There are further risks on the road. If I'm late for work, then I have to start driving a little bit more aggressively to try to make up some of the time. That causes stress. It causes anger. It causes shame because I'm always late. It hinders, of course, my witness then at work because I'm not exemplifying the character of Christ. I'm becoming an embarrassment. I'm embarrassing my faith, I'm trying to say. Others may begin to tell you then to arrive at different times than everyone else. And maybe some families do that with somebody who's chronically late. They tell them to show up a half hour sooner than everyone else because they know that they will be a little bit late. And so that's not a good way to live, where people have to tell you to come at a different time because they know you're going to be a half hour late, maybe an hour late. And when this becomes a consistent pattern, it's not excusable. After a while, it's not excusable. You might notice that those who are habitually late are usually late at the same value. They might always be 5 minutes late, always 10 minutes, always 15. So that means that is preventable. If you're always 5 minutes late or 15 minutes late, it means that you can actually be consistently on time just by doing everything sooner, planning sooner. But that's a trait for habitually late people, is they're always late by the same amount because they leave it to the last minute. So they have to be more consistent and plan a little bit earlier and be more thoughtful in their planning. The character quality that goes along with this command is truthfulness, obviously. Truthfulness versus deception. Truthfulness is communicating by life and by word what is genuine and accurate. Truth is the foundation upon which anything that stands is built. Those that are closest to truth are closest to God. In the continuing conflict between good and evil, truth is the weapon that wins the war. There are many sources of truth here that we see in the scripture. Number one, God is truth. Deuteronomy 32, 3 and 4. He is the rock. His work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment. A God of truth and without iniquity. He is just and right. Jesus is truth. John 14, 6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Number 3, the Holy Spirit is truth. 1 John 1, 5 and 6. This is he that came by water and blood, even Jesus Christ, not by water only, but by water and blood, and the Spirit that beareth witness, because the Spirit is truth. John 17:17, number 4, God's word is truth. Sanctify them through thy word is truth. God's law is truth. Psalms 119:42 and 151, thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy law is the truth. Verse 151, thou art near, O Lord, and thy commandments are truth. Number 6, the gospel is truth. Colossians 1, 5 and 6, for the hope which is laid up for you in heaven, whereof ye heard before in the word of the truth of the gospel, which is come unto you as in all the world, and brings forth fruit, as it does also in you, since the day ye have heard of it, and knew the grace of God in truth. The gospel is truth. What does the truth do? We have a lot of ideas here. What does the truth do? Truth brings us into Christ. James 1:18. Of his own will begat he us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. Truth brings us to the light, John 3:21. But he that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. Truth purifies our souls, 1 Peter 1:22. Seeing ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren, see that ye love one another with a pure heart fervently. Number 4, truth frees us. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. 2 Corinthians 10:4-5. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Number 5, truth leads us in the right way. Psalms 43:3. Send out thy light and thy truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me unto thy holy hill and to thy tabernacles. Number 6, truth equips us to worship God. John 4:23-24. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshippers shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeks such to worship him. God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Number 7, truth cleanses us of iniquity. Proverbs 16:6. By mercy and truth iniquity is purged, and by the fear of the Lord men depart from evil. Number 8, Proverbs 20:28. Truth preserves leaders. Mercy and truth preserve the king, and his throne is upholded by mercy. So turning the mirror back towards ourselves, how truthful are you? Do you ask others to point out your blind spots? Do you confront your blind spots with Scripture? Do you believe that you have no serious faults and think that you are better than you are? Do you exaggerate your achievements to others? Do you lie or only tell part of the truth to escape the consequences of your actions? Do you flatter people to gain their approval? Do you misrepresent the Lord with inconsistent or negative attitudes? Do you give damaging reports of others to make yourself look good? Do you guard against false teaching by confirming everything you hear with the truth of Scripture? And as we close this command, the question today is, why did God deliver Abraham and Sarah in spite of the lie that they told to Pharaoh and Abimelech, yet destroy Ananias and Sapphira for the lie that they told Peter? And just as a refresher, Abraham and Sarah told Pharaoh that he and his wife Sarah were brother and sister, and the lie that Ananias and Sapphira said that the land and property that they sold, what the offering they brought was all that they got for that property and land. So why did God destroy the one for the lie and spare the other? So dig into that question, try to gain some insight, and we'll answer this question in the next study. And by learning the answer to this question, it will help you gain further insight into the command to keep your word and what it means more and more. So let us all be people of our own word, so that the rest of the world can see that we are truthful and that we represent God in his truthfulness, and that we are among the light. We are lights in the world, and we follow and try to imitate our Father in heaven. And as we close today, sing with me this song, this old hymn that you probably know, There Will Be Showers of Blessing.
There shall be showers of blessing. This is the promise of love. There shall be seasons refreshing, sent from the Savior above. Showers
Thank you for joining me in this study of the command to keep your word. Please join me again next time when we answer the question that was posed. We'll have a new commandment, commandment number 9, and we will have a new song. So until then, my name is Stefan, and until the next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you for Jesus' sake. Amen.